Do we have any visitors this morning? Nobody? All local. Today we celebrate the sixth Sunday of Easter. We have one more to go. And the sixth Sunday of Easter, Jesus is preparing us for the coming of the Holy Spirit. And the Holy Spirit will come on the Feast of Pentecost, which is in several weeks from now. But he's also preparing the apostles for the fact that he's leaving. And that happens on Thursday of this week, the Feast of the Ascension, which is a holy day, by the way, of obligation, when Jesus ascends into heaven and gives them the great commandment of what they're supposed to do, the Great Commission. Well, he gives us a little bit of theology this morning in this short passage from the Gospel. He says to his disciples, it tells us, "Whoever loves me will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him and make our dwelling with him. And whoever does not love me will not keep my words." Now, what he's speaking to here is consistency. That walking our talk, that if we say we love Jesus, if we say Jesus is part of our life and at the center of our life, then our actions reflect that. Our actions reflect what we believe. And the whole spiritual journey, the whole spiritual life that we go through on this earth is about making our actions consistent with what we say we believe. Now, it's not an easy task. It's one that's extremely difficult. That's why there's confession. That's why we do lose our way, and we forget sometimes who we are supposed to be. See, even St. Paul writes in one of his letters, and ask yourself if this describes you. St. Paul says of himself, "Why is it that I'm always doing what I know I shouldn't and not doing what I know I ought?" Does that sound like anybody you know? No dieters in here. So it's part of the human condition, trying to remain focused, trying to remain in such a way that we make our lives consistent. The Baptists call it walking your talk. And it's important for us now today to reflect on that, because Jesus brings it up right before he leaves this earth. He reminds us of our human condition. He reminds us that this is a difficult thing. It's one thing to say, "I love Jesus." It's something else to live that way. So, he says, if you attempt to live that way, the Father will come to you, and the Son will abide with you, and you'll be one with your God, and you'll gain new energy. And that happens. There are times when we feel very close to God. There are times that we are good, and we feel great, right? You go to confession, you get unburdened, you spend time in prayer, and all of a sudden you have new energy. But then the world comes upon us. You know, that pesky world, that husband, that wife, that troublesome child, that pesky neighbor, the persons you work with or whoever. And all of a sudden we move away from God. And in moving away from God, we then begin to do damage to our spiritual journey. So, Jesus goes on to say that he and the Father are one, and they will be our companions, but we have to work at it. We have to make our love real. He says, "If you love me, you do what I ask." Now, we do that a lot, but sometimes we don't. And he understood that about us. Jesus was no dummy. And so he says, "I have told you this while I'm with you. The Advocate, the Holy Spirit, whom the Father will send in my name, will teach you everything and remind you of all that I have told you." We forget. So we need reminded. And so the Holy Spirit comes, and the Holy Spirit once again reminds us through the power of grace of who we're supposed to be. That's that nagging little thing in our back of our heads that tells us, you shouldn't be doing that. It's that nagging little voice in our that tells us you're eating too much, you're not exercising enough, you're not being very nice, you're not being very patient, you're not being very loving, you're gambling too much. That little voice in the back that tells us you should be saving for a rainy day. That's the Holy Spirit speaking to us. That's the Holy Spirit encouraging us. That's God's hand on our shoulder guiding us to where we should be. And so Jesus then goes on and he gives us two assurances. He says, first of all, be at peace. In the midst of this journey that we make, where we're real good sometimes and sometimes we're not, the Holy Spirit will take us by the hand if we listen and keep us going on the ways of goodness and righteousness. So be at peace. Just simply surrender to God and be at peace. And then the last thing he says, I am going to the Father, for the Father is greater than I. And he says, thus, now not as the world do I give it to you. Do not let your hearts be troubled or afraid. Sometimes we get afraid. Sometimes we wonder how we're going to do it. Sometimes we wonder how things will happen. But you know what? Things are going to happen no matter what we do. So let's not waste our time worrying. Let's not waste our time worrying what will be, because it's going to be whether we like it or not. So let us unite ourselves with God and just trust in God. And that whatever comes, comes with His grace. And He will give us what we need as we continue our journey through the spiritual life. So as you and I pray today, let us just remember what Jesus is telling us. The Holy Spirit is coming. The Holy Spirit is, in fact, going to be here to remind us. The Holy Spirit will be in our hearts. And if we listen for that little voice, we will be encouraged in the ways of goodness, in the ways of grace, in the ways of hope. So, love Jesus. Make your life consistent with what Jesus teaches. Let the Holy Spirit remind you when you waver. Experience the peace of God, and do not be afraid. Read this passage from John again, and make it today your meditation, for it describes so aptly our human journey. We get all disconnected from God and lose our way, but He always gives us a way back. Be at peace, says Jesus, and do not be afraid.